Hello YouTube, my name is Tyler and this is going to be my 2022 end of year wrap up. I know a lot of people tend to do tags for this type of thing. However, I'm just going to sit and talk with you, kind of talk about the stats that I have found, kind of talk about the reading rabbit holes I went down this year, and just books that stood out to me. I'm not going to go through every single book I read this year. I read 163 books and I'm just there's no way I could coherently talk about all those books and not have this be the most boring video on the face of the planet. So like I said, I read 163 books this year. I did some stats and things, kind of breaking down things. I'll try and take a picture of this so I can put it on the screen, but I do this little graph every year basically for my reading, just to kind of help me just visualize how my reading year went. So first of all, it was not a great reading year in terms of stars. I never really got over 3.5 stars. There were 2 months or 3 months that I got 3.6 and the rest were all like 3. There was 1 month that was like right on 3, which was like not a good reading month. And then the rest were kind of between 3.2 and 3.4. So like it was just kind of a meh reading year despite reading so many books. The average page length, according to Goodreads, was 295 pages, which makes sense. I don't feel like I read a lot of big books this year like I did the year before. And I think part of that is also like I have a hard time DNFing books that are under 300 pages. My brain's like, that's short, you should just push through and read it. And I think I need to get better about DNFing books I am not enjoying if they are under 300 pages. Just because they are short does not mean that they are going to be an easy read. I end up spending and wasting a lot of time on short books I'm not enjoying just because they are short. So I want to get better about that. So this chart is a bar graph of the number of books I read, and then that bar is kind of broken into a little section that is the number of those books that were 5 stars. The bar beside it is the number of DNFs, and then the bar beside that is the number of audiobooks, just because I was curious. So there were a couple of months I didn't have any 5-star reads, and when I look at that, I feel like that kind of correlates to how a reading month feels to me. If it feels like a good reading month, I've read a 5-star book typically, and it's not necessarily correlated to the star rating average, if that makes sense. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I also see that I am reading roughly an audiobook a week. Some weeks I have 2 books in a week, but that means the months go anywhere between 3 books and 5 books in a month. So I'm really happy with the pace of my audiobook reading, to be quite honest. So if I looked at specific numbers, I read 16 5-star reads this year out of 163. Which is 9%. I don't know what a good percentage would be of 5-star reads. I'm not expecting like 50% 5-star reads. Like that seems unrealistic, especially if I continue reading at the pace I am reading, 160 some books. So that seems unrealistic, but 9% seems heinously low. This is the first year I've ever done this stat. And that is too low. It's too low. I'm not happy with that. I read 49 audiobooks this year, which was 30%. Like I said, I'm very happy with that. I feel like 1/3 of my reading being audio is a nice little place, a happy little place for me in my reading. And in my audiobook reading, first, I'm reading stuff that I never would have like picked up to read, so like memoirs and stuff. These are books that I never would have consumed in any like physical format, just because I don't physically like reading memoirs, but they work really well in audio form for me. So I've expanded my reading by adding audiobooks to my my reading habit. So there's that, but I've also expanded my audiobook listening. I've started to read a little bit more fiction in audio form. It's not quite as easy for me to listen to fiction. I still need to find the fiction that does work for me in audio form, but like the classics, I read a couple classics in audiobook form. That seems to work sometimes. I read Pride and Prejudice in audio form. I read The Great Gatsby in audio form. I didn't read Wuthering Heights in audio form, but maybe I should have. I read Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, which was a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin. That was an audiobook. So there's that. Oh, and I read The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. I did that in audio form too, which actually worked quite well. And that's like a book I tried to read and really struggled with. And in the end, I like didn't love it. But audio allowed me to consume this book that I probably never would have finished. And kind of see if maybe a more denser sci-fi would work for me. So I expanded not only my audiobook horizons, but also I expanded a little bit of my sci-fi reading, trying to figure out what kind of sci-fi works for me. And if I can stretch beyond just like, soft sci-fi. So, that was a success. I really feel like I have found my stride with audiobooks. I'm very, very happy with how that's going for me. So I'm not going to go through all the months and flip through all the books. I have some books here that I think will be interesting to talk about. But I'm going to kind of talk about my reading rabbit holes first. So one of the big reading rabbit holes I went down, I feel like there are a couple of them that are kind of attached, but I think it started with the Satanic Panic. And so I read Sybil this year. I read Sybil Exposed. This isn't technically Satanic Panic, but does deal with like multiple personalities and like repressed memories this is like the 60s, but kind of helps lay the foundation, I feel like, for repressed memories, which helped fuel the Satanic Panic in the 80s and the 90s. I read a fiction book called Down the Whispering Lane by Clay Chapman, which was a fictionalization of the Satanic Panic. I listened to quite a few podcasts about it too. I read an Amazon book, I wish I could remember it was about a Satanic Panic case in Italy. All the Lies They Did Not Tell by Pablo Trincia. I read that. That was about the Satanic Panic. So that was just like a big interest of mine this year. A book about Go Ask Alice, like Unmasking Alice, came out this year, and that's on my TBR. I haven't gotten a copy of it yet, but like it's an interest of mine to read. So I read and just like thought about meditated on the Satanic Panic a lot this year, which also kind of led me down a few other rabbit holes. So I read some conspiracy stuff this year. I should have brought the book down. I didn't. I have a copy of The United States of Paranoia, which is about conspiracy theories. I haven't read it yet, but is on the list. I read something. Republic of Lies, American Conspiracy Theorists and Their Surprising Rise to Power by Anna Merlin. I read some other conspiracy things, I think. And I, again, consumed some podcasts about conspiracies. And there is something just kind of interesting about thinking about like the past with regards to the Satanic Panic and elements from that we are seeing being recycled in a certain right-wing conspiracy that is gaining popularity through the 2020s. And so it's just interesting to kind of compare and contrast those things and see the similarities and differences. I don't know, I read a lot of like history stuff about the 80s as history. But I read these things and I'm just like, time is a flat circle. When I read Reaganland 2 years ago, will be 2 years ago. one of my biggest notes was constantly just like, time is a flat circle. I feel like we're just like constantly repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So yeah, the Satanic Panic conspiracy rabbit hole has been something I've just been enjoying wandering down and reading stuff about that will probably continue into 2023. Kind of tangentially to that, I also read a lot of like religious cult stuff, both fiction and nonfiction. I read a number of religious memoirs about people who had left culty, not great religious things. I read Going Clear as an audiobook. I read Cultish, which is kind of talking about like cultish language and stuff like that. I read The Year of the Witching, which is like a culty fiction book about witches and fantasy-ish type things. Really enjoyed that, gave it 4 stars. Not quite 5 stars, but I enjoyed it. So I look forward to hopefully more from that, because it's supposed to be a series, but I'm not sure if it's actually going to end up being a series. I cannot find, I know I read a couple other memoirs. I listened to one while I was painting, Sex Cultnum. That is one that I read. Well, I listened to it. I read, oh, I donated the book already. I read one about a boy that was killed in his church. I didn't adequately prepare for this, is what I'm saying. Without a Prayer, the death of Lucas Leonard and how one church became a cult. I definitely listened to another one too. Broken Faith, Inside the Word of Faith Fellowship, one of America's most dangerous cults. So I definitely read a lot of like religious culty stuff. I want to definitely read more fiction cult stuff. I feel like that is something that really works for me. Another conspiracy one I missed was Sandy Hook, An American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth. That is about Sandy Hook truthers. And kind of along that line, I also read Putin's Trolls on the Front Lines of Russia's Information War Against the World. But that kind of connects to a different rabbit hole. I've been doing a lot of reading about Russia and Ukraine and the Cold War and the Soviet Union, just kind of trying to understand what's going on in the war against Ukraine currently. And there's just like a lot of history. So I even read a history book about Ukraine this year called The Gates of Europe, which was very dense, but you know, it was good to try to read it anyways. So I feel like all of my rabbit holes all kind of connect in an interesting way. Things that are kind of happening now and their historical roots kind of, and conspiratorial or culty aspects to that. So those were the rabbit holes I went down this year. Let me make sure. Oh, and I told this one does not connect, but I did go down a little bit of a Lolita rabbit hole. And that's because I read My Dark Vanessa, which I absolutely love. This was probably my favorite book of the year. I loved this book. I read it, I started reading it at the library, and I got like halfway through and I went and immediately bought my own copy because I just loved it so much. This is about a girl who is groomed by her teacher at this like boarding school that she goes to. And it goes back and forth between her in school and then her in the present as an adult, and the wrangling like mentally and emotionally that she does with this relationship that she had with her teacher, because he's kind of been Me Too'd in the present moment. And so she's wrangling with like this desire to like not see this relationship as problematic or harmful to her. Like she wants to see this as like a real thing, a real love, a real relationship. And so you go back and forth between their relationship in the past and her in the present. And it was just It was so good. And obviously like it references Lolita in here. So then I read Lolita, and I read Lolita, the real Lolita, the kidnapping of Sally Horner or something. What is the title? The Real Lolita, the kidnapping of, oh my gosh, I actually had that right. The kidnapping of Sally Horner in the novel that scandalized the world. So I went down that little Lolita rabbit hole, and I listened to a podcast called, I think it was just called the Lolita Podcast. And so there's some other books I got from that podcast. They talked about referencing Lolita or retelling the story of Lolita from different perspectives that are on my TBR. So I probably will continue to go down a little bit of a Lolita rabbit hole next year. But yeah, so those were my very big rabbit holes this year. But I think I'm going to embrace my rabbit holes a little bit more. I've always been a mood reader. I've always gone down rabbit holes, but I feel like with recording my videos and stuff this year, I kind of lost sight of that a little bit. So I feel like I'm going to embrace my rabbit holes a little bit more in the coming year. So I have some other books over here that I wanted to talk about. So these are books that I own, but there were other books that I don't own that I also enjoyed. So I'll tell you the 5-star books that I read. Three Girls from Bronzeville by Dawn Turner. This was a memoir. Lore Olympus, did I talk about that? That's a webcomic retelling the story of Hades and Persephone. Really had a great time. Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. This was the first Eric LaRocca I read. It was amazing. I loved it. It is like body horror sort of vibes. Really short read. Had an amazing time. I read another Eric LaRocca this year that I did not like, but really like triggered like the desire to keep reading horror and like figuring out what horror works for me. Yearbook by Seth Rogen. This was a memoir I listened to. It was laugh out loud funny. It is about his life. It's narrated by Seth Rogen. Really, really had a good time. Heartstoppers volumes 2 through 4. I read the webcomic again. It was good. It's cute. Enjoyed it. Illuminae, which I have here. This is a multimedia sort of book. I probably didn't open that enough, but I don't want to spoil anything. It's a multimedia book that's told in a series of files and transcripts and things about a attack that happened on a planet and those survivors escaping onto a ship. And there's like I think it's like a virus on one ship, and the computer has like started to malfunction and things like that. I just really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure if I was actually going to like it because it is more of like in space, spaceship type sci-fi, and I don't read a lot of that. My sci-fi that I tend to enjoy tends to be grounded on Earth. So I wasn't sure if I was actually going to enjoy this, but I really, really had a good time reading it. And it came off like a little bit of a reading slump, so it like really got me raring to go to read books because it was just so much fun, and I love a multimedia experience. So that was a 5-star read for me. Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution by Elie Mystal. I definitely read a few law books for, the general public this year because I got into a Supreme Court podcast this year. So I did a little bit of reading about lawyerly things. Other Terrors, an inclusive anthology. This also just fantastic. Had such a great time reading this. I've talked about short stories and anthologies tend to like be duds for me, and they almost all end up being 3 stars. But I had such a good time with this. I enjoyed so many stories in this. So even though technically I like did the math, I rated all the stories in here and then divided and came out with an average that was not 5 stars. I had never read an anthology I loved as much as this before, so I had to give it 5 stars. I had to override the math and give this 5 stars because I had such a good time. However, Kayla hated this book. So, and she reads a lot of anthologies. So, I don't know, maybe my recommendation is not worth a whole lot, but I really, really enjoyed this quite a bit. Yeah. How to Keep House While Drowning, A Gentle Approach to Cleaning and Organization by Casey Davis. This is a really short audiobook I listen to, and I tend to not like self-help, but sometimes I'll pop in and see what people are talking about. And this one just randomly got recommended to me through Libby, and I'm really, really glad I read this. This had a very big impact on me. It is meant for people who struggle with mental illness or disabilities of some sort, and being gentle with yourself and what you can and can't accomplish. Really highly recommend it, especially if you beat yourself up about not being able to keep house. I would really recommend just listening to it. I continued to read some manga this year, so along those lines, I read Uzumaki and Dementia 21. This was 5 stars. I really enjoyed the first volume of this. I didn't like the second volume as much because it tried to like really pull the story together and close it, but I liked it a lot more when it was kind of standalone, just story of the week type chapters. Oh, I have it upside down because it's manga, so the things are backwards. Anyways, so I really, really enjoyed this, and I might check out some more of Shintaro Kagu's work because I enjoyed this quite a bit. It was a little bit more on the goofy side, a little more surrealist, a little more silly in a good way. Like, I really enjoyed this, and I did not expect that I would. And then I also read Uzumaki this year. I went down and read quite a few Junji Ito books this year. Uzumaki was the first one I read and the one I liked the best. I don't know, there's something about the way his works end that I just don't like. They tend to go in a more cosmic direction, and I'm realizing that cosmic horror tends to not work for me, like especially on like a very huge global cosmic level. Like that just does not work for me. I like it to be smaller, I guess, my horror. And I think, you know, I like body horror, so I think that might be part of it. I want it to be more localized, and how much more localized can you get than your body being destroyed in some disgusting way? So this was the one I liked the best, but I read a couple other ones too. Yeah. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and talk about, this is not manga, but this was maybe one of the bigger books I read this year, Battle Royale, because I read Hunger Games, and this was kind of, not inspiration, but kind of reference for the Hunger Games. It is about a group of Japanese school children who are thrown into a battle arena, basically, and they have to kill each other until one is left. And I had a good time with it. I did a whole reading vlog on it if you're interested, and I go through spoilers and all that sort of deal. Yes, I still enjoyed it, so much so that I kept it. One of the other books I really, really loved this year and really had a profound effect on my life was The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. I will be buying a copy eventually. This is a anthropological book that kind of takes society to task about lies and myths we've been telling ourselves about civilization and how we have come to organize society, and like it is the only way we can structure society without devolving into war and murder and all sorts of things like that. It's a really, really, really dense book, and it's hard to summarize, but it really changed the way I understood what we could achieve as humanity. I tend to be a very pessimistic person. I tend to struggle with seeing a positive future, And this allowed me to kind of free myself in a way where I can say, society wasn't always like this, and this wasn't always predetermined, and we can change it if we want to. So yeah, I highly recommend that book. In the Dream House was another 5-star read by Carmen Marie Machado. Again, this is probably a book I will buy for myself. This is a memoir about her life in an abusive relationship. It's told in a very interesting style that I don't even know how to describe, but I loved it. The audiobook is narrated by her. It's excellent. Loved it. Highly recommend. And then the last 5-star read of the year was The Basic 8, which I'm not going to talk about again because I've talked about it a trillion times. I did not even bring my copy down. It's a reread. I love that book. It's one of my favorite books. So that's all the 5 stars. There are some other books I wanted to talk about. There are quite a few like 4 stars that I really enjoyed. Sorrowland. I'm not going to be able to find all of them, I don't think. Sorrowland was a 4-star. Oh, Sundial, also a 4-star. Really enjoyed this. Really had a good time reading this. I did not think I was going to like it because the back is very vague and it sounds very like domestic thriller kind of, and it's not. There's like some medical stuff that goes on in here. There's definitely like a family aspect, domestic aspect to it, but I just really liked this a lot. This is an ARC version, but yeah, I really enjoyed that quite a bit. The Last Quinista by Donna Barber Higuera. This was a like juvenile fiction type book, and middle grade maybe, I don't know, that is like sci-fi in nature. It's about a family that is like going to space to escape some sort of disaster that's going to happen on Earth, and it was great. I loved it. It was a heartwarming little tale. I loved it. The Year of the Witching I talked about too. That was 4 stars. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy was 4 stars for me as well. This was a very popular book this year. And I probably never would have read it if I hadn't gotten into audiobooks. It's narrated by her. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. Dreaming of You by Melissa Lozada Olive. Again, this was 4 stars, but I'm really glad I read this. This was a novel written in verse about Selena, the Tejana singer. I'm not a big poetry person, so I was a little afraid when I got into this. But it was so good. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I think I'm going to try a little bit more novels in verse in 2023, just because I had a really good time with that. Catherine House, also read that this year, 4 stars, had a good time reading it. I feel like there's, Ninth House also. Both of those were like books I was kind of skeptical if I was going to like them or not. Both of them ended up being 4 stars. And I had fun reading them. And then I have 2 other books over here that I want to talk about. Caste. I was really excited about reading this. I talked about it in my 2021 wrap up because I loved The Warmth of Other Suns so much. I went out and bought this during a snowstorm, I think in February. And when I finally read it, I just didn't like it very much. It felt very shallow, feels harsh. But like it just did not do a whole lot for me. I wanted something more deep dive, in depth, and it just like didn't do that for me. So that was a big disappointment for me. Another disappointment for me this year was Just Like Home, the Sarah Gailey book. I was so excited. The cover is incredible, and I just didn't like it very much. And then the last thing I want to talk about was Savage Appetites. I gave this 3 stars, but it's a book I think about often. It's one of those 3 stars that like, I had to give it 3 because half of the book I just didn't like or care for, but the other half like I loved, and the conversations that it was being that were being had in here about our relationship with true crime really was incredible. So it is a weird book in that, like, part of it I just like didn't care about, and then part of it I like could not stop thinking about. Honestly, if you like true crime, I think you should pick this up and kind of just think about your true crime habits. And as you can see, I really didn't read any thrillers this year, which I talked about in my 2021 wrap up, how I think I am moving away from thrillers. So yeah, that's kind of what my reading years looked like. My battery's about to die, so I'm gonna try and finish this up real quick. Thanks for watching. If you've watched any of my videos this year, I really appreciate it. I will see you next week. Bye.